The top story is Trump trying to seize power, with the Pentagon doing several strikes, now the fourth strike on a boat off the coast of Venezuela. This is, of course, at a time where we have other problems. The U.S. government is partially shut down. Of course, foreign policy can continue. But you have these rather dramatic scenes. They've killed 4 men who, according to the U.S., were accused of smuggling drugs. But that, again, is according to the Trump administration. This is not exactly some legal process. We don't have public evidence yet. Whatever the government releases will follow. The U.S. military has killed about 21 people, according to the evidence we have, that it asserts were drug traffickers, and there's no due process for that. So we're in more of a war posture, like I said, than a domestic legal one. Now, the wider context is Trump using the word war in a host of settings: war on U.S. cities, war for training grounds, war on these cartels, and trying to say they're unlawful combatants. Now, the wider context is the big problem here. If you've followed American foreign policy, it has aggrandized executive power, sometimes without Congress or legal proceedings, under many different administrations. Sometimes the threat was considered urgent and high, like after 9/11, or dealing with individuals credibly believed to be foreign operational terrorists. Drug dealing or international cartels are also a big problem for the U.S. and one you want to thwart, but legally under foreign policy, not necessarily at the level of post-9/11 terror. And again, that's just one piece. Then you have the crackdown at home, where troops are being asked to do things that are unprecedented without governor's approval, going to Tennessee and Memphis this week, Trump threatening Portland. There's reports that 200 Oregon troops are now going what they call initial military training, according to this ABC News account. Oregon already suing to try to stop what they view as potentially unconstitutional deployment, saying Trump doesn't have the authority there. And then there's ICE, which again has long operated under both administrations to do types of immigration enforcement. But under every other administration, including Republican ones, it has generally had a hierarchy and dealt with perceived potential or active criminals who are engaged in, say, the drug dealing, the violence, other things, differently than just anyone who might be undocumented. Well, those days have shifted. ICE escalating tactics in Illinois, arresting protesters outside an ICE facility after a confrontation. Agents in tactical gear roaming the streets. Many critics view it as something other than traditional immigration enforcement.
It is ICE's responsibility to respect and uphold our First Amendment rights. It is not on us to accommodate their illegal and immoral actions.
This is violence that we are seeing in our community. We have constitutional rights, and in the city of Chicago, every single elected official is going to protect those constitutional rights.
ICE targeting criminals or people believed to be engaged in violence, we've seen that before. ICE targeting protesters and walking around in masks and camo and clearly going at people who are either likely citizens or clearly citizens, haven't seen that. Presidents testing foreign policy powers even without Congress, sometimes using lethal powers, we've seen that before. Presidents doing that while waging a war, his word, on the home front, a war on our cities, asking the entire military to come together and giving a speech that was so obviously partisan that the generals, many appointed by Trump, had to stay in stony silence to show the country and follow the rules that this was partisan and not normal government leadership. We haven't seen that, not in the modern era. I want to bring in SDNY civil prosecutor veteran and human rights expert Maya Wiley, and NYU history professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who has studied and written about authoritarian governments. Ruth, the facts are what they are, and past presidents have certainly pushed the bounds of lethal powers abroad. So this is not a story where every single part of it is wholly unusual to Donald Trump. I say that in accuracy and fairness. But combined with a lot of what else is happening this week, there does seem to be alarms. How do you view it on the evidence, regardless of what one thinks of Trump's politics?
Well, we've been focusing a lot on the attacks on the rule of law at home as part of an authoritarian advance. And we can't separate this from attempts to kind of destroy respect for international law. And what the administration is really doing is redefining what the battleground is, where the battleground is, who is an enemy, who is a combatant. And these are all of a piece. And I know this because in my book, Strongmen, I studied these juntas, these military dictatorships in the Cold War, and the way that in Chile, Pinochet justified his crackdowns was saying it was now a time of war. And war was redefined to be a war on civilians. And so the military in Chile, which was very different than other militaries in Latin America, it was very democratic, very dedicated to the Constitution. It had to have this shift. And that's what Hegseth's speech at Quantico was about, from my estimation, was reorienting the military, saying, now we're untying your hands. And that meant implicitly to many people in international dealings as well. So this is an attack on international respect for international laws that are dictated by democratic internationalism. That's why there's been all the attacks on NATO. The admiration for dictators is also an admiration for their lack of respect for democratic international norms.
And Maya, this is coming as the White House is also facing anger and concern about the government shutting down and whether Trump has his eye on the ball of that, his job on the home front.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just underscore one thing here, and it is the through point between what you teed up, Ari, about what these attacks against people, civilians, who are being called, not necessarily with any demonstrated proof that we've seen, members of gangs, let alone whether this falls within the powers of the president, which I haven't found any authority for, and there is none cited for. Remember, it's Congress under our Constitution that declares war. So that's important to know. But the through point here is these are civilians, whether we're talking about the people on the streets of our cities or whether we're talking about people on boats in international waters. There's no allegation here that they are actually part of armed forces that the U.S. military would take action against. And the line being crossed in both of these instances, and to your point, where Donald Trump is using language of war, whether it's related to U.S. civilians in our own country or in these attacks in international waters, really amounts to the same thing. We're seeing him utilize the military in ways that have nothing to do with the norms or rules that bound the U.S. military. And the only reason to do that, to Ruth's point, is to abuse power for personal gain. And to your point, because he's in a situation right now where the economy is not going well for a lot of Americans, where we're seeing Americans taking hits on their health care because of Republican and his administration's policies, where we're seeing chaos. It's a word that I think we've heard others use, but it is very well felt inside the Capitol in terms of the operations of federal government, and it is impacting ordinary people. And then you have things like the Jeffrey Epstein files, which the majority of Americans want to see. There's a lot to have to distract from, and it's not uncommon to abuse power, to drive division, to give someone a different focus and a different enemy. And far too often, that's us, civilians, we the people.
Right. And you talk about those walls closing in, the government shutdown, Epstein, other issues, Trump officials blowing the whistle on their own administration, somewhat unusual. We have more on that actually coming up. On the autocratic issues, Ruth, I wanted to show you this headline: Treasury considering a $1 Trump coin, which they say would somehow commemorate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Of course, you got about 240 years of history you could draw on. You can see the prototype here, according to Politico. I'm going to leave this on the screen because you have on the one side the kind of profile picture we associate with dead presidents, but deceased presidents usually long after their political rule, if they are seen at that level to make a coin, make the coin cut, if you will. And then on the other side, you have, of course, something that was a terrible moment for the country, the attempted assassination, but lionizing that with Trump's fist in the air and a coin treatment. Where does this fit in with how the U.S. usually does this and how more autocratic regimes do it? Because it looks quite unusual.
Well, it is unusual in democracies because this is part of President Trump's personality cult. And he has been building this for 10 years now. And really, books will be written about how skillful he was at keeping his personality cult going, even when he was out of power for 4 years. And so now he is, very open about being an autocratic, a strongman. So that's why we also have giant pictures of his face on government buildings, looks like North Korea or classic dictatorships. And so why not have a coin that immortalizes him as well? And it's his, the posture of the fighter, the rogue. And so, this is of a piece what we're discussing, that this is somebody whose way he operates is to be a fighter and to declare war and to think of everything as either he wins or else. And so the coin is about that, coming back with the fist raised, and now declaring war on America, and that includes American civilians.
From having a pride flag displayed on your desk to just doing your job prosecuting bad guys, seemingly anything and everything is now a fireable offense in the eyes of the Trump administration. MSNBC has new reporting last night that an FBI agent trainee was fired for simply having a pride flag at his desk in a California field office last year. From that reporting, quote, the trainee, who previously worked as an FBI support specialist in Los Angeles, received a letter dated October 1st and signed by FBI Director Kash Patel, claiming he had displayed an improper political message in the workplace during his assignment in California under President Joe Biden. That's according to a copy of the letter shared with MSNBC. The agent trainee, who had most recently been assigned to the FBI Academy in Quantico, won an Attorney General's Award in 2022 in recognition of his work. The FBI did not respond to a request for comment. Just last week, Kash Patel fired at least 15 agents who bent a knee during the George Floyd protests outside federal buildings in Washington, D.C. What NBC News reports was a, quote, tactic meant to de-escalate the conflict, end quote. We're back with Carol, Michael, and Angelo. Carol, this is your reporting. Take us through it.
So a couple of are we now at 20 hours ago, we were hearing reports that tipsters calling us in, telling us about an agent who was in training to join the FBI, had already been an FBI staffer, had been summarily fired, got a notice from Kash Patel that he had displayed something in his office that was, quote unquote, showed poor judgment because it was inappropriate political signage. This inappropriate political signage didn't exist anymore. The support staff member had worked in LA, and in his office there, he had a gay pride flag. This no longer was standing, but the reports of it somehow made it back to Patel, and he ordered the termination of this individual. I would say, Nicole, two things. It's really easy to fire a FBI agent in training because by dint of getting promoted, as this person was being promoted, he is more vulnerable to being fired as he's on probationary status at that time. That's a disappointing element of the firings. They often take advantage of the fact that someone's getting promoted and they have to be in the job at least a year before they have protections. The second is this idea that improper political signage might be a gay pride flag has just as not as seriously as your earlier segment about we as Americans are less safe. It has also chilled people inside FBI field offices who now have to wonder what things might they have in their desk? What pictures or memorabilia might they be displaying that will run afoul of these MAGA rules that Patel is running by and using to administer the premier law enforcement agency in the world?
I have to just stop the flow of insanity for a second. I mean, is it legal to fire someone because you learn they're gay?
Absolutely illegal, and the Supreme Court found so. And I can't imagine how this will go. I will tell you that my inbox is filled with lawyers telling me how illegal this is and how they expect this individual to sue.
Michael, let me read you a little bit more of Carol's reporting. When Trump was weeks away from inauguration in January, FBI agents and Justice Department prosecutors were warning one another to be careful about displaying information revealing their own sexual orientation or support for lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender rights. After the inauguration, one person said FBI agents warned colleagues that they heard new pro-Trump appointees installed at the FBI were combing through internal employee files to find lists that identified employees as LGBTQ. Tell me what happens, just in sort of your investigative profile skill set, what happens to people that they think a moment will never end, that they're combing through personnel files trying to ascertain the sexual orientation of employees at the FBI?
This is insane on so many levels that I don't know where to begin or how to demarcate all the different tiers of inanity that this signifies, but I'll do my best. First of all, the FBI's mission statement is to uphold the Constitution of the United States and protect the American people. The Constitution has certain guarantees under the First and 14th Amendment that protects people's right to speak and protects their sexual orientation. There are Hatch Act considerations that prohibit certain types of political advocacy by a federal employee, but a pride flag implicates none of those. You know, for every year I was in the FBI during Pride Month, every single FBI field office and every single DOJ building would fly the pride flag outside. So what this employee was doing was not at all out of line, out of the norm, or at all inappropriate. It's absolute madness. And the fact that Kash Patel would go after this individual is lunacy. He was an Attorney General Award winner. That is the Justice Department's highest award for investigative or prosecutorial accomplishments. I spent the first portion of my career in the same office as this individual. I don't think we overlapped, but we know a lot of people in common. And based on what I've heard from all my friends who are still there, he was somebody we very much wanted in the organization. This erosion of constitutional protections and rule of law is getting so far out of hand that I don't understand why American citizens are putting up with it.
Angelo, if only we hadn't been warned, right? I remember the day. I remember the summer day that we let you know a little bit ahead of time, and Andrew Weissman was in the block as well, and we were just reading through Project 2025, and we did a whole block on the FBI chapter. And a lot of this is in writing, but a lot of this is both moving more quickly and two, being executed by someone like Kash Patel, so it moves somewhat unevenly. But just tell us what else is in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth, one, you know, there's going to be a lot of little details, which I'll sort of list a couple of examples. But the biggest takeaway from Project 2025 broadly, and even this section on the Department of Justice and the FBI and law enforcement, is sort of this continuation of this narrative, this notion that, remember, it's worth considering, a quarter of the country has been pickled in for almost a decade. This is not new to 25% of the voting public. They've been pickled in this, which is this notion that the deep state, in particular the DOJ and the FBI, are fundamentally corrupt to the core. That is the through line. That is the justification for why all of these other actions are necessary, because the idea is that they're rotten to the core, that they were weaponized by Democrats, by liberals, by sort of this secretive cabal, deep state, and then used to punish the political enemies, Trump being the clearest example of that, but then they have lots of others. And that is it. And that it's going to come after them next, individual conservatives. And that narrative And that it percolated for all before Trump's first term, during his first term, and then right through Project 2025. I mean, it is right at the very beginning. It is the entire rationale for everything. And the solutions that they propose is a gutting. I mean, they literally, they describe a massive gutting, a total overhaul from top to bottom. And the orientation for that overhaul is not to identify tweaks here and there and say, oh, well, we can be more efficient, we can reprioritize around certain types of law enforcement for national security, otherwise. No, the entire orientation is around how do you both, one, as rapidly as possible restore pre-Watergate norms, which is to disabuse people and the public from this notion that the president cannot be involved in the DOJ. That's step one. And then the second thing that it orients around is to turn it to, as a way to fix what they say is the politicization of law enforcement in the DOJ, is to turn the DOJ into a weapon, into an instrument of politicization for Trump and conservatives. How do you turn it into a political arm? And so all of the things that they prescribe are exactly what we're seeing play out now. Anytime somebody pushes back, they're a member of the deep state. They obviously have bad intentions. You can go back in their history and find examples of them sort of executing deep state plots against Trump, 1 or 2 degrees removed. They all need to go. There's no room for nuance there. They all have to go. The slightest bit of taint is enough to say is to sort of eliminate it. So that's the second piece, is to turn into an instabilization. And the third part, which this most recent reporting plays out, is then you then sniff around for all what they describe as DEI. You sniff around for any small indication that an individual is either an agent of the DEI agenda or was affiliated with it or somehow got their job because of it, or they're even sympathetic for it, and you get rid of them. So it's all about personnel. Policy stuff is second. Be more brutal, more law enforcement in local municipalities, using the death penalty more. Yeah, there's a lot of those prescriptions. But fundamentally, it is that. First, make it clear that the president's in charge. Number 2, turn it into an instrument of politicization by rooting out as many people that put up the tiniest bit of friction to uphold norms. And then the third is to sniff around for sort of that, anything related to DEI and get rid of those individuals as well. And then you can start to rebuild it after that. So that's the scary part, is once they as they remove these people, they're not, some positions will be left open, right? Because they're not going to fill it up completely. But the scary part is what comes next. And that's really where we're going. And it's not just who they fill it with, but then this next phase, which is to go from the perception of power to the consolidation of power, to actually turn it into something that is much more calcified and entrenched in our day-to-day lives.
Donald Trump cannot escape his Jeffrey Epstein problem or statue. The statue of Trump holding hands with the dead convicted sex offender returned to the National Mall yesterday after it was removed by the National Park Service last week. The statue has a title. It's called Best Friends Forever. It includes a plaque that reads, quote, "In honor of Friendship Month, we celebrate the long-standing bond between President Donald J. Trump and his closest friend, Jeffrey Epstein," end quote. The group responsible for the statue tells Axios in an email this, quote, "Just like a toppled Confederate general forced back onto a public square, the Donald Trump Jeffrey Epstein statue has risen from the rubble to stand gloriously on the National Mall once again," end quote. The Epstein case also being kept in the news today by Donald Trump's own pick to be the country's commerce secretary, a man named Howard Lutnick. Howard is facing mounting calls to testify today before the House Oversight Committee in the Epstein investigation after he made these bombshell remarks.
Why is there now such a dearth of information when, Donald Trump's people are running the FBI and the DOJ?
I assume way back when they traded those videos in exchange for him getting that 18-month sentence, which allowed him to have visits and be out of jail. I mean, he's a serial sex offender. How could he get 18 months and be able to go to his office during the day and have visitors and stuff? It must have been a trade. So my assumption, I have no knowledge, but my assumption is there was a trade for the videos because there were people on those videos.
What? Quote, how did he get 18 months? He's a convicted sex offender. On that, I'm with Lutnick. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She serves on the House Oversight Committee, which is investigating the Epstein case. Mara and Basil are still here. Congresswoman, you want to talk to Howard Lutnick, too?
Absolutely. Listen, I mean, he said, I don't know, but one thing is clear. He knew enough to know that he did not want to hang out with Jeffrey Epstein and that he was his neighbor. He talked about the fact that he was into some questionable things. So I'm sure he's seen people come and go, and he seems pretty confident that there were videos of this. So I would absolutely love to kind of dig in a little bit more and at least get a list of names to work from and start to kind of build backwards and do the work that Alex Acosta and that DOJ failed to do.
Well, he says in that interview that they, quote, shared a wall. I don't know what billionaires have for home alarms, but like a Ring camera would have probably picked up some images. I mean, do you want to see his surveillance footage if he has any?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if he still has it, for sure. We know that that was actually one of the things that Alex claimed was problematic for him, that they did not get the video footage that Epstein had as relates to that Florida case where he ended up getting the 18 months. So anyone, and you know, in fact, let me make a plea right now. If you have video footage of anything that was going on at the Epstein home, whether it's Florida or New York or anywhere else, please feel free to contact the House Democrats on oversight, and we will do everything that we can to make sure that the truth starts to come out.
You know what I thought listening to that interview? I listened to the whole thing, time I'll never get back, but he talks about taking his wife over to Epstein's house. He describes him as, quote, gross. And he describes a tour that Epstein gave him of his fancy house, which was, I think he said, quote, so wide. And they go from the living room, and he thinks that the double doors are opening into a dining room, because I guess that's what all the house's floor plan is. I don't know. And it's a room with a massage table in the middle. It seems to me that if one of your peers, instead of a dining room, has a room with a massage table, and don't you think they talk amongst themselves? And this is something I've picked up from all the victims. I mean, the victims have suffered because they were siloed in their shame and in their trauma. But the people who knew about Epstein, they were never shamed and isolated. They all hung out together. I mean, does Letnick give you more names of people that hung out and maybe also went on the tour and saw the massage table?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do think that he has names. I mean, the fact that he felt like that there was video footage, and he obviously felt like it was video footage of people that were important enough that he would end up with a sweetheart deal. I mean, your everyday Joe walking in and being caught on video doing something nefarious doesn't necessarily equate to something that I've never seen as a practicing lawyer. I mean, the amount of allegations that they had against him at that time, and then for him to get that little amount of time, in addition to, as he already laid out, he had privileges that afforded him an opportunity to continue to commit crimes, and everyone looked the other way. I mean, this was like the nightmare that would not end, and even now that Epstein is gone, it's still a nightmare, because you have people like the President of the United States saying, oh no, this is nothing more than a Democratic hoax, and consistently, really invalidating what these victims / survivors experienced.
Congresswoman, I wonder if it's enough to bring Acosta back, that Donald Trump's own Secretary of Commerce believes that I just want to get his quote right, that they traded those videos. How else could you get 18 months? He was a convicted sex offender.
Yeah, Alex Acosta, as far as I'm concerned, he probably walked as fine a line as he could, but I did not feel like he was completely truthful. Obviously, we did a transcribed interview. I would love to get him in a deposition setting instead, and I really want to dig in on a number of things that I was asking him about. He basically hid behind the fact that he was the U.S. attorney for that area. And so, as we know, anyone that sits that high is not necessarily into all of the specific details of any given case. But this was a high-profile case, so he was briefed on it. I want to talk to the other people that were on that team, the people that he said flew in from D.C., and sat down and had roundtable conversations about them. I want to see how many of his statements align with theirs. The only thing that we know is for sure there was a line prosecutor, someone who actually was looking at all the evidence and was doing everything that she could to make it clear that this is somebody that needed to be prosecuted. She had drafted a 53-page indictment, and they decided, nope, never mind, we're not going to go forward with that. Instead, we're going to kick this back down to the state, and we're just going to non-prosecute this case on the federal level. But we're not going to be open, honest, and transparent with the victims as the law requires, because what we're going to do is work around the law and say, well, you know what, he's not officially indicted, so do we really have to honor this? Maybe not. I mean, it was just too much shady things going on. And right now, so many of the survivors talk about the fact that the FBI refuses to give them access to their own statements and their own files about their own cases. So that is why it is so important that we get our newest member sworn in so she can be signature number 218 so that we can take a vote of the entire House and hopefully get the release of the Epstein files ordered. And if for some reason there's a problem, hopefully we will have a little bit more strength if it is a full vote of the House to then go to court.
We are following some major breaking news out of Gaza, where Hamas has just announced that they will release all of the remaining Israeli hostages, both living and dead. I've got the statement right here in front of me. I'm going to read it to you. We just got this in. In order to achieve a cessation of hostilities and a complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the movement announces its agreement to release all Israeli prisoners, both living and dead, according to the exchange formula contained in President Trump's proposal, provided the field conditions for the exchange are met. In this context, the movement affirms its readiness to immediately enter into negotiations through the mediators to discuss the details of this agreement. So again, that is Hamas saying that it will now release all of the Israelis that remain in captivity, both living and dead. That is part and parcel to the proposal that President Trump had laid out in order to create the conditions for a ceasefire in this longstanding conflict. We are now about a week away from the anniversary of October 7th. The president had given Hamas the deadline of Sunday at 6 p.m. Washington time. Clearly, this is coming in far before that deadline. I want to bring in now the New York Times' Peter Baker, our political analyst, as well as our senior White House correspondent, Vaughn Hilliard. And Peter, just react for a moment to Hamas essentially acquiescing here.
Yeah, on the surface, at first, certainly it looks like a very promising development. They're saying that they welcome Trump's peace plan, that they want to find a way to basically meet its conditions. Now, the devil is going to be in the details. It says it's going to negotiate details, and we've seen moments before where it looked like there were moments of progress, and then the details, bollocks things up. For instance, they do say that they want to agree to surrender control of Gaza to a Palestinian independent body. Well, that's not exactly what President Trump proposed. He proposed a body that he would actually chair with other notable figures like Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister. So it's not quite clear whether Hamas is agreeing to what President Trump stipulated on that part of the plan, or whether they have some other ideas in mind and whether that could be negotiated. But on the whole, it's very promising. Our reporting from the ground in Gaza has shown there's a great impatience on the part of Gazans to get this war over. They were pressuring Hamas to come to the table and find a way to accept Trump's peace plan, that they need to move on beyond this war to begin reconstruction and begin taking care of the people who have been suffering so much over these last couple of years.
And their demands had been echoed by virtually the entire Arab League. And Vaughn, I know this news is just breaking. Are you hearing word from the White House about their reaction?
We're actually waiting for the White House. I am told by one source, though, that Qatar and Egypt, who have been working as intermediaries, that they transmitted this message from Hamas to the White House here. And in the statement, it says that the movement affirms its readiness to immediately enter into negotiations through the mediators to discuss the details of this agreement. Of course, earlier this week, Bibi Netanyahu and President Trump made clear that it would be a 72-hour window in which Hamas had to turn over the remaining hostages here. I think Peter's absolutely right. It's in those details here about what does the actual control over the Gaza Strip look like here going forward, because Hamas seems to, at the end of the statement, indicate that they will be a part of conversations about the future of the Palestinian state and will contribute to it with full responsibility. That's a little different than what President Trump had suggested, that Hamas would have an option, either one, to leave Gaza and find safe refuge elsewhere, or to effectively disarm and seek amnesty in Gaza here. And so I think that there's those questions. But let's be clear, this is a big deal and a big step in the direction toward ending this war. Obviously, having prisoners from both sides, including Israeli hostages, returned here. And it started 1 week ago over at the UN General Assembly when President Trump met with President Erdogan. He met with the head of Qatar, other Arab leaders, nation leaders, and so that's where that 20-point plan was first presented. And ultimately, he was given the backing to meet with Bibi Netanyahu at the White House a few days later and essentially put the pressure on the Israelis to accept this agreement. And now Hamas indicating that it will work and cooperate here. This is undoubtedly here for this White House a big move, and one that could potentially, hopefully, open up some humanitarian aid capacity as well for those that have suffered inside of Gaza.
And Peter, really quickly before we have to close here, just zoom out about the events of the last few weeks. We saw that strike in Qatar. We saw Bibi Netanyahu do the remarkable thing of apologizing for it on a global stage. We saw the recognition of a Palestinian state by many global players here. We saw the Arab League take the unprecedented move of condemning Hamas, telling them to get to the table. What does this mean? After you've been watching the region for so long, break this down for us. Explain the impact.
Well, look, I think it's the first time we've seen President Trump really try to impose a settlement on this war that's been going on for now nearly 2 years since the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. And it really shows that the American president has the ability to be a major player. In fact, is the really indispensable player historically, has always been, this position has always been in the Middle East, whether it be this president or other presidents. So he, for the first time in his second term, has really come to the table and said, okay, here's a solution as I see it. He got the Israelis to agree to it. It looks like Hamas is at least making a step toward agreeing toward it. Again, those details may matter, but it's the most promising moment we've seen since President Trump took office again in January when it comes to ending this war in Gaza.
Hopefully, this is the beginning of the end of a very dark chapter. Thank you so much, Peter Baker. Thank you, Vaughn Hilliard.